That we've got going on is I'm fishing it's about a 4-acre lake in Illinois, northern Illinois right here. And I'm noticing that, we're going to just break this down step by step. How on earth do you approach a pond like this? Well, it's hot. It's in the middle of September, and I've tried stitching a little bit with some night crawlers just to get some sort of a read on, do I see any bait fish? I saw a bluegill swimming out there straight ahead. That tells me that there's some active fish right there. And that's just stitching a crawler for about 10-15 minutes. I pulled up weeds. Everything seemed to be dark and green. That means that this definitely is a pretty solid shoreline. I see a lot of potential here, but the main thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to hit the shade over there. The sun is coming up, and these bass are not going to be in this bright sun. So the shaded side is really going to be, finding them in the shade is really going to be the ticket. It's a little early. I got out here maybe an hour earlier than I normally would, just to document what on earth, what am I looking for when I'm looking at a lake. And basically the first thing that I'm looking for is I'm looking for deeper areas that I could fish. This is not one of those deeper areas, but the reason why I kind of hung out here in the shallows a little bit is to note the vegetation in the bluegills. So fish activity should be solid, and it looks pretty good. Just those little simple things can be real confidence boosters when you're fishing a new lake, as opposed to just going out there. I mean, normally I would just go out to that corner and I would plug away with some crankbaits, but now I feel like I have a little bit more of a comprehensive game plan to go after these fish, now that I've just taken a look at the biology around me to just see where I should be and where I shouldn't be. So I can see a lot of shallow water around this area, which is pretty much where I shouldn't be. And I'm going to have to try to see if I can find some deeper shaded areas without walking all the way around the place. And that actually may be on that other side right over there. And shade is an edge for bass, obviously. So finding the shaded spots is going to be the number one variable going into this game. Doubt I lost one of my favorite crankbaits, my Spro Ruku shad. It looks like it really is pretty shallow in and around this body of water. So of course I start to get psyched out. It's been a while since I fished a newer body of water, and it just dawned on me that maybe a little floating Rapala like this would be, my longer rod would probably be a little bit better. But again, I'm using a 6.5 foot medium light rod. It's got a really nice tip. Kind of what I've kind of been focusing on is lighter crankbaits on a spinning rod in the Midwest for bass. You can catch some really big ones. I've caught 20 inchers on them for sure. Usually your walleye and your smallmouth anglers use them, but for the most part, what I'm just going to be doing is really running this thing. Boy, I hope I didn't get another weed. Yeah, this thing is pretty shallow, but my gosh, there's just a lot of good vegetation around it. Looks extremely promising. It's been years since I've ran a floating Rapala, and throughout the course of my riding, it's popped up 2 or 3 times as a number one choice. That casts nice on the shorter end. It pops up in my writing, it pops up in my recommendations at work quite frequently. It's extremely versatile bait. It looks like I'm just going to be imparting some twitches. And with your medium light, with your spinning rod, it's not exactly a parabolic crankbait rod per se. What you do is you loosen your drag, and you're able to add that level of versatility. So not only do you have kind of a good walleye rod, a good smallmouth rod, but you've got yourself a good largemouth rod too. I'm just going to work this thing in here and see if I can get. What I'm basically looking for is, normally, what is my game plan? I fish for big bass and I try to get on them as quick as I can. But with there not being a heck of a lot of cloud cover in and around here, finding groups of active bass also starts to play kind of a pivotal role as well. I grew up fishing these floating Rapalas. They're still great. I added this little clip here to give it a little versatility, and it's just a number. Gosh, what the heck is it? It probably weighs 3/16 of an ounce. Just a classic color. Fishing this little shaded area, that is the ticket. When you're shoreline fishing, the real ticket, and I'm actually going to a lot of people would think I'm crazy shore fishing like this, making an underhand cast, but what you want to do is, if you've never fished a body of water you're going to have to maybe back catalog to something you've had success with. I grew up fishing these. I probably haven't thrown one with any seriousness in quite a few years, but I'm thinking that I really don't want to slow down with a worm right now. It is turnover season, turnover period, and if you're newer to bass fishing and you're not quite sure or you need a refresher, I'm not going to go over the different layers of water. But there are different layers. There's basically 3 different layers of water, and when your turnover is, the water on the bottom is warmer than the water on the top. But a few good days of relatively warm weather will certainly draw, and that's just the great thing about this Rapala is you can twitch it along the top. It is my all-time favorite top water, without question, just because of all the things that you can do with it. And again, your sun is going to start cutting down at a lower angle pretty, during the fall. It's pretty hard to rule out top waters, even though I'm not a huge advocate of them. And that's just simply because what I usually like to recommend, again, I'm doing something different here today, it seems like, is baits that work from ice out to ice on pretty good. And there's so many of them out there that, we can kind of lose track and really try to have a million baits to focus for a million different situations. But I guess as far as versatility baits go, this Rapala is one of the absolute all-time favorites. I don't even know if many largemouth anglers are really keying in on them. I actually know from personal experience what really I had relatively good success with them. As a matter of fact, growing up, better than any of my dad's crew that fished lures, but I don't know what their expertise level really was at the time. There was a gentleman, we actually called him Santa Claus. He had a long beard, and he would throw these Rapalas on Zebcos, closed-face Zebcos. And back in those days, if you can believe this, Zebco would clean your reels for free, or replace the parts in them if you gave him your name, I guess. And this guy worked these on these super low gear ratios about middle of September into October, twitching them and reeling them in really, really slow for bass in and around the drop-off areas. And I mean, that guy probably caught in my life, witnessing firsthand, as many big bass as I'd ever seen anybody probably catch in a relatively short amount of time outside of myself, which is pretty cool. But this kind of, I see some bluegill patting around here. But what are we normally focusing on with the hierarchy of the channel? The top priority, which I came up with, is that pH level. Unfortunately, some of those areas that I'm looking at across the shoreline, those may be your best pH areas. But the unfortunate reality with that is they're getting pounded by the sun right now. So midday fishing is really not something that I'm a huge fan of. I kind of maybe was the stereotypical bass fisherman years ago that fishing in the early mornings was the big ticket. And that's kind of important to a degree, but the thing about doing that all the time is you get locked into those lures and those patterns that kind of fall into those, summertime early type stuff. You don't branch out into your fall fishing, your early spring. And even though you can have success, you kind of stagnate and you lose interest. So, I mean, picking up something like this may seem crazy. I know that I fished with people and said, my gosh, I haven't fished this in lures, fished a lure in years and actually had some success with it. Or fishing a location I haven't used in years and plugged in a new variable. But bass fishing is all about these types of combinations. And I mean, to be honest with you, the types of combinations that I'm casting and working right now, they're slowed down versions of probably something a tournament pro would use. They're not really my traditional bread and butter applications, because most of the ponds or lakes I'm fishing would have more immediate drop-off areas. Now, ideally, my 7-foot medium would maybe be a little bit better option for this. But the 6.5, it's hard to say. Length on a rod is not always, again, I don't know if I've reiterated this in a video, length on a rod does not determine casting distance. Casting at a 45-degree angle does. It surprises me why so little or no media actually that I've ever read or heard mentions that, and that's the real key. And with a sensitive parabolic 6.5-foot rod, you've got a real good versatility stick on your hands, and not just for shore fishing, but for any kind of largemouth fishing you're going to do. Now, I guess a question would be, what am I doing being kind of situated from the shore in this one little shaded area? Normally I would reference that I would run a crankbait in 2 different directions, but I'm not really doing that with this. What I'm doing is trying to cast and look good, but maybe not doing the best job at it. There we go. What I'm doing is I just used it pretty much as a standard topwater. Just kind of twitched it along. And now what I'm kind of doing is I'm running it maybe a little quicker and just having it dive below the surface. I mean, this is actually kind of like a suspending type of a jerkbait. It's a topwater and it's a crankbait. So that's one of the first lessons we learn as bass fishermen. I mean, it seems like the original floating minnow was perhaps like the first crankbait so many people throw. But its versatility still, to this day, I mean, it's not a good late fall bait when bass are deep. It's not a run and gun crankbait. But I mean, as far as Doug Hannon goes, he actually listed it as one of the best big bass crankbaits out of all the ones he fished throughout his whole life. This bad boy right here. And he wasn't big on hard baits for big bass. He liked his plastics, but a floating Rapala still is worth almost within itself if you haven't thrown one a season of experimentation. And I don't know, I still think that this is worth checking out. I know so many people would fish a crankbait one way. In 2 or 3 hours of fishing, it sounds kind of crazy. I actually gain confidence, not lose it. And that can seem kind of strange. If you think your top 3 producers or you're grabbing a rogue bait like this and just trying to make something happen. But the main thing is to try to find an area, it may be the size of the casting area may be the size of a bucket for that one big bass, and that has proven true. And just finding something that's gonna nab their attention, get them to strike. And again, keep your pH factor in mind. All that stuff out there, it's pretty much, a lot of it's unavoidable.